Okay, so I want to turn our attention towards the skandhas as a one of the ways that we can map the mind, as it were. Awareness can map the mind, and the sort of, if you like, the purpose of this is to get some inside knowledge, if you like, on how we sort of make up our world, how we construct our world. There is a purpose to this. We're generally sort of looking out from that world that we've already constructed. So we don't know about its biases and the sort of views within it that can create a lot of suffering for us. So in a way, the whole practice is about being able to see how we're constructing a world out of little bits of experience, out of little assumptions that have big implications. So it's not something, well, it's something we can talk about, but it's much more effective to see it in your own experience, to see that process as it's happening through the individual skandhas, in a way, working together with the glue of clinging, the glue of craving. And I'm going to focus particularly on the mind, or the mental skandhas. And we'll continue to explore rupa, to explore body and physical senses through the practice. So what I wanted to do is start with vedana, or feeling tone, which is basically how we feel about things, our earliest sort of feeling response to happenings, to objects arising. And that feeling tone is conditioned. It's something that it's been accumulated through past experiences. We tend to have a similar response. So feeling here is working with perception. We have a similar response to perhaps things that have happened before, or things we've experienced before, finding them pleasant or unpleasant. But the basic tone is simply feeling. It's simply feeling. When perception gets involved, which it does at a very, very early stage, then there's an interpretation, based on those previous experiences. Yes, there's a lot to say about vedana, or feeling tone, and I'm actually going to say very little. Very little. I want us to start with an exercise to get a sense of perhaps how feeling is showing up for us right now. But in a way, what I want to focus it on is the process of how feeling and feeling tone conditions what comes afterwards. It conditions problematic reactions in terms of greed and hatred and delusion. I'll say a little bit more about that later. But for now, let's, if you sit in a way that's comfortable, and I'm going to lead into this exercise. So just to be clear, with feeling, we're not talking about, I'm sure a lot of you know this, we're not talking about emotion. We're not talking about the more complex mixture of thoughts, body sensations, images. Something simple and, to my mind, somewhat elusive to pin down. Very subtle. Subtle mental factor that can be recognized as in relation to a bodily experience or a mental experience. So for now, just letting yourself settle. Just coming into the experience in quite a gentle, quite natural way. And you might notice different objects in experience just through being present. There's no need to look out for things, but just when you're present, you'll notice things. And for this particular exercise, it may be a little easier to have your eyes closed. Settling into relaxation of both the body and mind. And perhaps having the sense of receiving sensation, letting experience come to you. And as you settle more, awareness settles into the body, into embodiment, without particularly looking. Let's take in some sensations, maybe just one or two sensations that you're finding pleasant. There's some degree of pleasure in the experience of them. And let the attention move around quite naturally without seeking out experiences. And feeling tone tends to be quite subtle, so you may not previously have registered particular sensations as pleasant. And you may find that this is happening quite naturally, but have a sense of also noticing or registering sensations experienced as a little bit unpleasant, unwelcome. As well as physical sensations, you might also notice sounds, different mind objects, images or thoughts, memories. They're not trying particularly, but you may be able to discern a general feeling tone of a little bit pleasant or unpleasant. Other times there may just be more neutrality. And in a very relaxed way. At times you might be able to distinguish the sensations, whether sound sensations, mental sensations, or physical sensations, distinguish those from the feeling tone. We tend to impute the feeling onto the object or into the object. This is not the case. Don't worry if you can't do that, if it doesn't mean much. Stay with the feeling. And you might just have an intuition that there are sensations and there's the feeling tone, whatever that is. And one last thing. Can you recognize the feeling tone of awareness? The feeling tone of awareness in the present moment. When the mind is relaxed and simple, this is usually a pleasurable feeling. So I'd like to invite a few comments or observations. Anything that you noticed that caught your attention in that exercise. Initially, maybe just people who haven't spoken as yet, and then if this time, just because there's a lot of us. Yeah, Eric, yeah.
Thank you. Up until now, when thinking or when looking for feeling tone, I've been, as it were, trying to look for one thing. Something you've just said makes me think when you talked about a sensation and the feeling tone, and then mindfulness and a feeling tone. So are there more than one at once?
You mean more than one? I suppose they're different facets, different sort of mental sort of facets working. I mean, it's all a model, isn't it? But there's you can identify different facets at different times. Yeah. But certainly sensation and the pleasant or unpleasant feeling are different things. Yeah. We don't always experience them like that though. Yeah. Like I say, we impute them into the object, and that's partly on the basis of how perception works with feelings and how they how they've interpreted things, or particularly perceptions interpreted things that have happened in the past. We generally don't like that. We generally don't like pain. So we've got some already. We're sort of predisposed to finding it unpleasant. yeah, that particular thing. Or, oh yeah, we're predisposed to like ice cream. So yeah, pleasant feeling arises. But what can be interesting is when when the conditions change, what that doesn't take into account, the pleasant or unpleasant is sometimes say when I've eating an ice cream but I've got a toothache or I've got a cavity or something, then that experience can be quite unpleasant. So it is quite good to have these little sort of confoundings of the habitual assumptions around feeling. Yeah.
Thank you.
Anyone else? What did you notice? I won't be able to see you if you're not on the
I could say something.
Annie, lovely, yes.
I found that really strong, Vajradevi. It's something about the softness and kindness of your voice, which was really lovely, but at the same time set off a whole load of stuff about loss. And then it was very hard to come back from that into the feeling tone, separate what was going on. So
yeah, thank you. So I think what you've I've got an echo for some reason. Okay, so what you're describing, I think, is that process where, like you say, it's hard to come back to feeling once, in a way, that a train of different associations of feeling, image, thought, body sensation, that takes us to new ground. It takes us into we leave the realm of in a way, that simplicity of feeling, and we go into conditioned process, conditioned responses and reactions. Because loss clearly is a much more complex event, if you like, mental event, than that simple feeling. Yeah, and that's thank you for saying that. That's what happens all the time. All the time we have these conditioned processes that arise from quite small amounts of initial subtle material, a subtle feeling. Yeah, thank you. Maybe one more.
Adrian wants to say something.
Adrian?
Hello.
Hello.
I became aware of the sensation of pleasantness around my lips, and I wondered why that might be. And I became aware that I associated that with the pleasure that I get from kissing. And because I'd kissed my wife earlier. And so what it led me to understand was the aggregate that glued it all together was that the lips per se are not pleasurable, but because I'm associating that with that feeling tone and the aggregate of the craving, that then led me to that understanding. Is that appropriate?
Yes, yeah, craving itself is not one of the aggregates, but it is where the aggregate of feeling and perception together lead. But you're absolutely in the right ballpark. It's the interpretation of and the past associations of feeling and perception working together. That in a way they've created this association, which means that those sensations, which are possibly quite neutral in themselves, but the interpretation of them is a very pleasant one. So yeah, thank you. That it's fascinating. I think how much we can learn just through the simplicity of looking to stay with the feeling or the feeling tone, but with awareness, we're able to see what else is happening, how those associations and interpretations are or have been made and are coming to bear once again in the present. And that's part of that self-construction, that self-creating that I was talking about. There's all this stuff that from the past that comes to bear in a tiny sensation in the present moment, and will condition future moments. And in a way, what we're looking for with the process of conditionality it's talking about is how to understand that process, how understanding that process of conditionality sets us free, and it certainly sets us free from the more problematic habitual reactions that the mind can go into, which are of course towards craving and towards aversion. Yeah, so thank you all.
Question about a vedana of awareness. Do you want to take that?
Okay, so got one last one. Tracy.
Yes, sorry, Vajradevi. You said during that exercise you talked about the feeling tone or the vedana of awareness itself.
Yes.
I didn't know if you were going to say more about that because I was a little puzzled.
Okay.
Thank you.
Okay. So what was puzzling? Maybe I just need to ask that before I make an assumption.
I think that the overall feeling tone and then pleasurable feeling sensations and unpleasant and neutral made sense. But when you asked about, when you said about the awareness of, the feeling tone of awareness, I think that's the words you used, or the vedana of awareness, I tried to step back and look at that. And not much happened, I think, and I thought maybe I was missing a point somewhere.
No, not necessarily. I mean, it can be that it's awareness feels a bit more neutral, a bit more impartial, but often the experience of being aware is quite pleasurable. The experience of being in the present moment can have its own, and it is, of course, it's very subtle, but it can be very motivating to key into that, to think, oh, actually the process of awareness itself has a subtle pleasurable quality to it. And even sometimes the neutrality can be it's funny to say this, but it can be subtly pleasant. It's certainly sometimes the maybe neutrality we tend to not associate it with to associate it with an absence, but actually when the mind is seeing more clearly, when awareness is there, then that sense of impartiality, that sense of in a way a lack of reactivity in the mind can lead to can be quite pleasant, in the sense of, oh, there's a peacefulness, there's calm, and those in themselves can be felt in the mind as pleasant, as pleasurable. Great. Thanks for everyone for sharing their experience and their questions. It's very helpful for me because it sort of brings, it's a very nice way to be able to sort of bring out a bit more of the teaching through responding to what's live for you. So I'm going to make a bit of a bridge to move on to something else. But in Triratna, we use this language of the gap a lot. And I imagine that most people will have heard of that. If not everybody, it's the gap between feeling and craving, or grasping and craving. And so it's a gap between the direct sort of feeling that's arising and the gap is there to help us not fall headlong into some sort of expression of craving or aversion. So the feeling tone conditions, pleasant feeling tone conditions, liking conditions, craving, wanting. Unpleasant feelings tend to condition something that's unwanted or disliked, and so we go down that trajectory. So the idea with the gap is that we're able to stay a bit more with the feeling and go less into the story, what we call the story, which is more the fully blown emotional state or state of prapancha. And actually, it's very difficult to do that. So what I want to focus on for the rest of the morning is, in a way, the fact that gap, even though we talk about it at a particular point, what I think that gap is, it's a gap where we become present. Another way of talking about the gap is that we're just aware in the present moment. And when we're aware in the present moment, we're introducing a new element into the scenario. For example, pleasant feeling going headlong into liking, wanting, craving, acting on that craving. There's a whole momentum behind the habits of that move very, very swiftly from feeling to full-blown wanting or what not wanting, yeah, pulling towards us or pushing away experience. So when we're aware in the present moment, there's a new element that changes or gives the opportunity for new choices. It influences what happens next. And that might depend on, if you like, awareness might be quite sort of weak, quite sort of flickering, or it might be quite well established in the mind. So to the extent that awareness is up and running, then there will be more or less influence on the mind in that moment. So looking at it in this way, the gap or the awareness in the present moment doesn't just have to occur in that moment when we're between sort of feeling and a fully established reaction. Actually, that gap can happen anywhere in the process, anywhere we bring awareness. So we could be already in quite strong anger or quite strong wanting something, and if there's the habit of remembering to be aware, the moment can still be influenced. We can still, there's still the possibility of recognizing what's happening. Yeah, the opportunity to see clearly what's going on in the mind in that moment, and sometimes that's enough. Sometimes that's enough. So we always in our world, when we're running around doing the things that we do, we always, if you like, we have the precepts as a protection, that we have them as they protect against, they guard against our unskillful actions as much of the time as we can. I mean, they're a working ground. So there's this lovely list. I think Bhante talks about it in possibly in Wisdom Beyond Words, and it's a list of the 5 restraints, and one of them is restraint by ethical conduct. It was possibly originally for monks, because it might be something like restraint by the ethical form or the ethical rules. Something in the language makes me think, or maybe it's to do with these hundreds of rules that Theravadan monks have, but the principle is the same. Restraint by ethical conduct. But there is amongst these other forms of restraint is restraint by mindfulness and restraint by wisdom. So here it's a sense of mindfulness having well, what I'm calling influence, having enough influence to make a difference to what the experience is in the moment. So if you like, we can allow it to sort of be a bit freer if that we have confidence that mindfulness can hold experiences, then perhaps we can be willing to feel them out a bit more fully, feel that reactivity. And in a way, that's what I'm encouraging in the practice, is to feel what we're feeling and to know it clearly, know what does anger feel like in the body and in the mind. Is there a quality of energy, a quality of heat, a rush of whatever? And the job of awareness is simply to, can I be with this? Can this just be held in this moment with interest and openness? And when awareness and right view are working together, it can be really seen clearly as this is what aversion is like. This is what aversion is like. Often it can feel quite unpleasant. Sometimes it can get to a point of feeling neutral, because the quality of mind that's aware of it, the awareness, is a stronger factor in the mind than the aversion. So there's a certain, we need a commitment to be willing to be with experience that usually we might just label unpleasant, and that desire to get away from it would kick in quite quickly. So I wanted to just say a little bit about pleasure, just to ward off any sense that pleasure isn't. What's the place, in a way? What's the place of pleasure in the spiritual life? So what I'm talking about in terms of staying with experience, come to it this way. One of the Buddha's great understandings, his great realizations, was realizing that as human beings, we think that we only have one option when it comes to the things that we don't like, the things that we experience as difficult or unpleasant or plain nasty. When we're suffering, our option is to go towards pleasure, to try and fight it, to get away from what's unpleasant and to find something that's pleasurable, if you like, to have a different experience. And sometimes that helps. Sometimes it works. Sometimes chocolate really does do magic when I'm not feeling very happy. But at best, it's a partial and a temporary fix. So the wisdom of the Buddha on his quest to understand and end dukkha, suffering, was that staying with experience, with awareness, with mindfulness, whether it was pleasant or unpleasant, could resolve suffering. It could resolve that experience of suffering. So we develop a mind that's not thrown into either elation or despondency when there's a pleasant feeling or pleasant experience, or an unpleasant feeling or experience. But the Buddha also said that pleasure was there to be experienced. If pleasure will arise through the senses, we have a body, we have senses, we see pleasant sights, we hear pleasant sounds, we have pleasant sensations arise within the body. And so a pleasure will arise on the basis of just having a body and being open. And it's natural that happens, and it's natural that we enjoy those pleasant feelings and experiences. The trouble comes because when craving arises, we so easily attach to those pleasant experiences. We want them to happen more. We want them to happen again. We seek them out. And so that's the working ground. It's not the pleasure itself. It's the we don't want to make pleasure our guiding principle, if you like. You know, that spiritual rudder I think I talked about when talking about sampajanya, that if you like, the way that the continuity of purpose and clear comprehension of our purpose. So we can follow that in the direction of wisdom, and that's like a guide. Or we can sort of have pleasure as our guide and our sort of principle. And as practitioners, I'm sure that we don't have that consciously as our guide, or even perhaps unconsciously, but it's they're very strong tendencies in the mind, craving and aversion. So there probably will be some, the mind is biased towards those things. So we just need to watch out for that. Watch out, what's the motivation in the mind when there's a pleasant experience, and we can really feel the pleasure of it. Is there a sense? Can you notice, and not with any judgment, but just can you notice a sense of, oh yeah, there's something that's pushing a bit. It wants it to stay, or it's reluctant to leave and break contact with that pleasant experience. And just notice that, oh, within this appreciation of a pleasant experience, maybe it's a beautiful view. I love walking by the sea, so I get a lot of pleasure from that, the Welsh coastline. And you know, if maybe on one of our walks there's a turning inland, we have to sort of go inland, and maybe it's a bit dull for a couple of miles or something. In that having to leave, I can notice feelings of regret or a sort of impulse to stay. So all those things can be noticed in awareness. And by noticing, we're not judging them, we're not saying that they're bad or we shouldn't be having them, but they're data, if you like. They're interesting in terms of how the mind is working and what it's biased towards. I've got a little quote from Analia, which I wasn't going to read because I thought I don't know, maybe it's a little bit hardcore in some ways, but I feel inclined to read it. So if you find it a bit hardcore, just dismiss it. But it's Analia talking, and it's in the context of what I've noticed in myself, a sort of addiction to sense experience. You know, the mind is always wanting to be in contact with sense experience, and always looking to sort of seeking pleasure from the senses, from external sources. So Analia is saying happiness is mental after all. It's we experience happiness in the mind. Searching for it via sense experiences is therefore a detour. Searching for happiness within by establishing a wholesome condition of the mind is more straightforward, more direct, more meaningful than trying to do so through sensual gratification. So he's saying, why not just look after the quality of your mind? That's where happiness is to be found. So why not, do the things that directly conduce to that, and that we can summon up under our own steam, if you like, through meditation, through reflecting on the Dharma, through all sorts of things. But I wanted to read it partly because it just gives a sense of how it is within us. This sense of pleasure, of happiness is within the mind. But often we do think that it's available out there. So as I say, if it's useful, great. If it's not, jettison for another time. So I think actually that's enough talking, and I knew that I would have far too much to say this morning. So I think I'm going to try and let's have a little break. In fact, let's have a 15-minute break. Yeah, and come back, and then we'll meditate. And I might just say a couple of things about more directly to do with craving and aversion, and recognizing them quite practically within our experience. I think that would work best. So I'm at 22 minutes past. Okay. So let's sit. Feel free to sip your tea as you go along if 15 minutes is quite short. And tasting touch sensations. And I'll lead into the territory of in a way bringing awareness to wherever we are in the process of between pleasant or unpleasant feeling and full-blown craving and aversion. You might need to move your computer a little bit away from the shrine. So in the usual way, just settling into some posture that supports awareness. that supports relaxation, supports the intention of the mind to be present, to be awake. And to be curious. And let that settling process be a gradual inhabiting of experience, particularly in relation to tactile body. Within the physical body, but within the space around the body. Space that receives sounds, visual impressions if your eyes are open. And you may find yourself quite naturally tuned in more to pleasant or unpleasant feelings in relation to sensation. Not trying to see anything or make anything happen. In fact, the more relaxed and open the mind is, the less of an agenda it has. Usually we're more then able to see more or to know more. So it takes courage to stay with experience and just notice that we'd rather something else was happening. Just notice that thought. Unpleasantness can come in many forms when it develops a little further down the line towards aversion. Boredom, restlessness, agitation. And then perhaps the more obvious manifestations of aversion, irritation, grumpiness, fault-finding mind, judging mind. And it can be very helpful to notice these, to perhaps even label judging mind, critical mind. We're helping to objectify what's happening in the mind in a way that decreases our suffering. Just knowing that there's judging, rather than being quite identified with harshness of judgment. It takes metta to have this type of objectivity. And the qualities of allowing whatever's arising to be there, and the quality of accepting what's there right now. They both have the flavor of metta, without us needing to actively develop or cultivate it. It's naturally threaded through awareness, like threaded through silk, threaded through fabric. In meditation, we might find these aversive qualities also can manifest as frustration, seeing what's wrong in practice, what's not good enough, not enough concentration, not enough peacefulness or calm. So seeing not enough mind can be very helpful. So if you notice any of these factors of the aversive mind, that's great. Once we recognize something, it's no longer working away in the back of the mind, in the viewing mind, if you like. We brought it out in front of the lens by naming it, feeling it. recognizing all these manifestations of mind, manifestations of klesha. It's a sign that awareness is working well. So you may also be able to experience the quality of the aware mind. That sense of ease with whatever's happening, sense of pleasure or enjoyment or appreciation in the mind. And you may already be noticing some facets of the wanting mind. That well-worn route from pleasure to wanting and craving. And this might manifest as a sense of longing, wishing, or hoping. There's some sense of enchantment with the desired object. Sometimes we can recognize over-eagerness in the mind, when the quality of interest has become corrupted by craving. There's a wanting something back from the object, from the practice. In meditation, the wanting mind can manifest by seeking more. What we have isn't enough. That's the feeling. But also ambition or striving or expectations about what should happen. So many of these things may not be influencing the mind right now. You might just recognize a couple. But over time, it can really help to recognize as they arise, the influence, usually a contracting one. that they have on the mind, pulling towards or pushing away. Very different from the peacefulness and good humor of the mind that's aware. It's just willing to be with whatever is there. And sometimes you might not be able to distinguish craving or aversion. It might seem like it's both operating at once. And that's because they are two sides of the same coin. And remembering not to jump on experience, but to receive it, to let it come to you. All we need to be doing really is just reminding ourselves to be in the present moment, reminding ourselves to be aware. And then what is noticed? What is noticed in terms of the thoughts, images, sensations arising in the mind and body. And every now and again checking how you're relating to the experience. And that's often where craving and aversion hide out. So we can make that relationship to experience an object itself. These manifestations of craving and aversion in the mind are not wrong. They're a natural part of the human condition. And they each have their job to do. Craving wants. Aversion. Its job is to push away, not wanting. Awareness's job is to observe, to notice. And what we're looking for is to create the conditions for awareness, mindfulness, and right view to be stronger factors in the mind than the factors of craving and aversion. You can notice what happens when awareness is able to observe some manifestation of craving or aversion in the mind. Let's be curious. Does the feeling increase or decrease? Noticing where staying with is possible, and when at other times the mind goes into stories. And whatever happens, just reminding yourself to be aware in the present. And allowing right view to recognize clearly what's happening. So let's do what we did before. It would be nice to hear from a few people just how what they noticed. What did you notice in that practice? Perhaps what caught your interest, or moments when you felt you were particularly aware. Leela Siddhi.
I noticed relentless planning, and the unpleasantness was manifested in this furrowed brow that, yeah.
Great.
Yeah.
So you use the word relentless. So it suggests that that you were experiencing as unpleasant.
Oh, very.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So yeah, you can recognize the unpleasant, and then maybe you also had it gone further than that towards not wanting, an aversion.
Oh, yeah.
Okay, great. So the thing is just to see different parts of it. Okay, so there's the one thing, and the mind can tend to focus on that. Oh yeah, there's planning, but anyway, what else? What else is also going on? So yeah, okay, the unpleasant feeling, the aversion, because they'll all, if you like, they all keep the experience going.
Absolutely.
So the more that they can be recognized in a way, the more we can sort of, the hold can relax on them keeping each other going.
Yeah. Thank you.
Okay. Matthew?
I was aware that there was pain in the body, but there was no pain in the mind. My mind was being informed of a pain. And there was an interesting thing that arose in the form of thought, was a curiosity, as in how many breaths before my body resolved the pain. Yeah, it knows what it's doing. And it was about 8, 9 breaths, and then that pain would subside. So the body had responded to that. I did not interfere by constructing scenarios or wanting it not to be there.
Mm-hmm.
Mind just observed the fact that it was there. And then when it moved, the body came to respond on it. Sent out all its lovely little chemicals that works the pain thing. Yeah. So there was that hysteresis or lag between the painful sensation and the body's response to that, not my mental response, but my body's response to that particular vedana. Yeah.
So can you say something of when you're talking about it as being the body's response? What's the sense of there's quite a lot of clarity around that. So what's the sense? You say more around that sort of sense of certainty of the body's response. And
it's like
what was happening in the mind that was observing?
Body knows what it's doing. Body is more intelligent than me, right? Far more intelligent. And it knows how to address issues of pain. For example, I bang my head, 10, 15 minutes later, the pain's gone because the body has responded to that pain. My mind has been joggled by it, but the body itself is on the job, it's responding to it. I keep myself out of the scenario. I don't build up pictures about it.
Okay.
Accept that clear picture that allow the body to do its work.
Okay,
That's
I just want to suggest,
knows best. Yeah.
I want to suggest something that actually the mind is, so what you're saying is great. You're keeping the thinking mind is not interfering in the process, but awareness is different to the thinking mind. So awareness is that can be knowing interrelationships between body and mind in this broader sense. So just going to suggest that part of what is allowing that lack of sort of reactivity, is allowing a calming, is a mutual relationship between body and mind in the broader sense. So I just leave that with you in a way, just to it's important, I suppose, that we don't just see the mind in terms of thinking, the interfering, the sort of reactive mind. But actually awareness is something that can have a really beneficial effect. Awareness and wisdom have a beneficial effect on our experience overall.
I was thinking of mind as the sati pool, the awareness pool that was there. It was being informed of, and there was another part, my physiology responding to it.
Okay.
But the calm centre was there, observing.
Yeah, great.
Aware. Yeah.
That great.
Ballpark.
Yeah. Thank you. Great. Rachel. Yeah. There's 3 Rachels, I think. But okay, Rachel Floater.
Yeah.
Hello.
I sort of started to realise that just being there, being in the moment, started to feel like I think you said something about it would be pleasant, and I just thought actually it doesn't feel that pleasant. And then I was just starting to realise that it was my mind that was making it unpleasant when you said about the not enough mind. And I thought, well, why would just being here not be enough? And then so that changed it, and I realised there was nothing else to do except be there at this time. I didn't need my mind to be fixing things or doing anything.
Yeah.
That was something I'd noticed before.
So when you say it changed it, do you mean it changed it in that sense of becoming a bit more pleasant, or how did it?
Yes, it stopped being unpleasant.
Yeah.
It turned into something more pleasurable.
Great. So what you've described, it's very clear what you've described is in a way coming to see that there was some attitude in the observing mind or the viewing mind or the awareness, we can call it lots of things, that's influencing. It's like the coloring is not enough view is coloring how everything is seen. But once you are able to recognize that, it sort of becomes something that's in front of the lens, to use that image, or in front of the spectacles, then the mind is clearer, isn't it? Then the awareness is actually is not sort of colored in that way. It has more its own coloring, which you recognized as more pleasant. Does that describe it?
Yes, it's sort of putting aside the doing mind.
And that sort of view that something needs to be done in order to be affecting the experience in some way, or the object in some way. Can have a big effect, just putting down that. Great. Maybe
3 questions. I don't have any to take. Liz is next on my list.
Okay, Liz.
Hiya. I had an interesting experience of sort of swinging a bit between pleasant sensation but also aversion. So I was experiencing sleepiness with my eyes open, and my initial response was, I don't want to feel sleepy, I want to feel alert. So there was this kind of aversion. But then I kind of looked at it a bit more and thought, actually the starting point is, well, sleepy kind of feels quite nice. So there was this, and I would sort of drift back and forth a little bit between the two, which was a bit, and then when you said something about craving and aversion being sort of 2 sides of the same coin, I thought, I can see how that's working anyway in that experience.
Good. Sometimes when I was saying this in one of my reviews yesterday, sometimes when sleepiness is there, we can maybe not recognize that there's pleasure, and you did recognize there was pleasure, but there can be a sort of buying into the pleasure, so a sort of slightly relishing, I'm quite enjoying this, in a way, not quite recognizing pleasure as a factor of mind that can be known in awareness. So in a way, awareness is in the driving seat, if you like, rather than the bit of identification with the pleasure. And so I think that can, if there's identification with the pleasure, that can sort of set up a bit of, oh, but I don't want this because, yeah, the mind wants, I want the mind to be awake or something like that. So maybe the only other thing you could have recognized is just, is there some sort of sense of identification with the pleasant experience, and what's sleepiness like itself? What's it like to be with that object that's arising in the mind? And maybe also, what's it like to be with the aversion? What's the aversion like? Can I see that more clearly? Yeah.
Thank you. Yeah.
Okay, we're probably just one more actually.
Okay. So Lucinda's wants to add something.
Lucinda.
Hi.
Hello.
I noticed that my pain and fatigue was getting worse throughout the meditation. And I noticed at the beginning, I found it easier to sort of stay with it and stay aware, and felt a sort of contentment around my awareness whilst feeling it at the same time. But that with time, that actually became harder and harder. And particularly as the fatigue got worse, I noticed that it became quite hard to just sort of stay aware. Awareness was sort of slipping away more and more towards the end.
Yeah. I think working with quite significant pain and fatigue, they're quite difficult objects for the mind to have long term. I know from my own experience. Yeah, so it could be that you need to sort of take a bit of a break, just give the mind a little bit of a break in the middle of a practice when you notice that sort of tiredness. It's like it wears the mind down a little bit. So maybe just take a break, look at something pleasant, or be with an object that's a little bit more neutral stroke pleasant, like if the breath works for you in that way. Or in a way, just recognizing how the experience is changing. So, okay, so the awareness is struggling more to be with those objects, of experience. So how is the quality of mind changing? In a way, just very, very gently staying with that. Okay, so it's the awareness might be decreasing. There might be a bit more of a sense of struggle. Is it possible to be with that again in this really gentle way? So whatever's happening, in a way, you go with it rather than say, oh, you've recognized the awareness is changing throughout the practice, and it can be really easy to create a judgment around that. Oh, it's not as good as it was at the beginning. So okay, so it's changed. It's going to change. Conditions change. The mind gets a bit more tired or something. With the lightest possible touch, what's that like? What's that like? And when you need to, you just step out, say, okay, that's enough for now. The awareness is the quality of mind is, it's not able to stay with these objects, and change the focus and let the mind become a little bit more resourced. In a way, that's what we're doing. We're cultivating. A teacher in Burma likes to say we're cultivating positive mental states in meditation. And if we find that the mind is sort of getting pulled down in some way, and over time we find we can't, it's less helpful to stay with that, we do something else. So we've always got options, and we've always got the initiative in terms of what's helpful now. What's helpful now to keep some thread of awareness, and maybe that, as I say, is being with a neutral object, or looking at the view. Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay. So I know there are more people with comments and questions and experiences, and that's great, but I think we will leave it there for now. There'll be other opportunities to talk about your practice, and I'm very happy to hear so many of you are willing to do so. So I just want to just run my mind around what I might say in relation to working with craving and aversion. Maybe just to reiterate how counterintuitive it is to stay with experience, to stay with something that's difficult or unpleasant, or to stay with something that's pleasant, and in a way perhaps watch those impulses to pursue it further, or to get lost in it, to tell ourselves stories about it, but just stay with what's happening and notice all of that. I've got a reading somewhere, I might try and find it, where Bhante talks about mindfulness. We're working with the bedrock of our experience. We're working really sort of deep down, the bedrock of the mind. That's what he says. So that takes courage, and it also, bedrock is hard, isn't it? It's hard. It's rock. So. Yeah, we can't just go at it with a crowbar. We need that patient, persistent energy, and of course to appreciate our efforts, to appreciate all our intentions to be aware, to notice what's happening in the mind. I think it's Pema Chodron who says this is the territory where the warrior learns compassion. So I think we can learn a very, very deep compassion just with a simple act of staying with, until we recognize perhaps that something else needs to happen. The mind is getting a bit overwhelmed with what's happening. So we keep the initiative, learning to keep the initiative. What's helpful now? And what we're doing when we're shifting that is we're not, it's not an avoidance. It's not an acting out of aversion by saying, I'm not going to stay with this difficult experience anymore. It's a recognition that in that moment, it's a bit much for awareness. It's a bit much for the mind. The awareness is losing ground. So by finding a different type of object, the awareness is able to be more resourced, become more resourced, and then we can go back to that object. If it's still around, it may have changed in the meantime. So it's definitely, it's not a practice of avoidance, but it's not a practice of gritted teeth staying with. The staying with is so that awareness can learn from what's happening, not in a conceptual way, but in a much more intuitive way of understanding. I think this practice of staying with, it's one where we can learn not to be afraid of our own minds or our own experiences. Perhaps a bit how Matthew was touching on this when you were talking about, you know, in a way just staying with pain and seeing that change. There are many different ways of staying with, and our experience will vary from moment to moment and person to person. So for someone staying with a big scary mind state is perhaps much more challenging. And for others, it will be the experience of pain or discomfort. But I think it's quite a gift to in a way learn to be with a larger and larger range of experiences over time, where that reactive mind, even if it does kick in, and there's a sense of not wanting, that too can be seen in awareness. So this is clearly quite a it's a practice that happens over time. We observe what that relationship, that interrelationship between mind and body, how dukkha is created from any experience or not. In a way, how we relate to the experience determines whether further dukkha is created. So this afternoon, just to say what we're going to do this afternoon, I thought I'd lead through a practice that a bit like with the lying down meditation we were exploring, the one that I led, we're exploring this sort of far reaches of relaxation awareness. I think the practice this afternoon will be more that in a way where that's overlap between mindfulness and metta, the territory of really receptive awareness, that receptive metta quality that comes in. So I'll do that, and I think I might just try and tell a few stories from my own experience of working with some forms of craving and aversion, and mostly they happen off the cushion. Sometimes they happen on the cushion. So just to give you a bit of a sense of how I've worked with it and how it's I don't know. There's a lot of possibilities here. Awareness can hold anything, not all the time, but the more we're able to resource mindfulness, the more it can hold. Okay, so I'll leave it there for now. See some of you this afternoon for reviews. Let's hope the tech gods are with us, and yeah, have a good afternoon.